Hey everyone, I'm Josh Olson. This is my YouTube channel, A Conversation With. Today's guest has worked for CBS News for 11 years and is the owner of Mixperience, which we'll get into later. Today I have a conversation with Chris Mix. Chris, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm great. So how's the weather in New York?
Well, it's really awesome. It's nice. It's sunny. Last weekend it was pretty gross, but this weekend it was pretty great. So that was nice.
That's awesome. Let's start back in your college days. Let's start back with Belmont University.
Yeah.
Talk about what you went to school for and
Yeah, so I went to school. Well, like you said, I went to Belmont University. It's a small college located in Nashville, right down the street from Vanderbilt. Not many people knew about it. I started there in 2004, and so I actually originally went because I wanted to be a vocal major, and I screwed up my audition. So I got into into the business college, and they were like, "Well, you could try again next year." And by the time I got into it, I got so involved with doing some really other, some other cool things that I ended up never auditioning for the music school again. But so I came out of there with a business degree. And they didn't really have emphasis at the time, but I arranged my schedules in my classes so that it was really a emphasis in production design and management. So I got really involved doing a lot of, school sponsored showcases, and they had a really robust learning program in terms of actually giving kids a budget and letting us go and start producing shows.
oh wow.
A lot of them were concerts and stuff. And so anyway, did that for 4 years and some variety shows, and really got all the experience that I possibly could.
So
That was great.
Talk about a couple things.
Yeah.
The first one was you kind of worked for the CMT, the Country Music Award show.
Yeah, so it was cool. So since our school was so involved with music, being right there kind of on Music Row with country music, and there was a really robust program of them trying to get kids into the music industry. So one of the things that we ended up doing was actually hosting the CMT Awards at our school. We had just built a really big new event center. And it was at a time where there were so many things happening in Nashville, so many different events that were happening in Nashville, that the main arena there, which I'm not sure what it's called now, it's been called so many different things, but they couldn't host the awards. So Belmont had been used multiple times by a lot of acts for rehearsing for their tours, for indoor arena tours. And so it was kind of on the map, I mean, for many different reasons, but they knew that we had the ability to do it. So we ended up hosting the awards there for 3 years. She would not remember this, but I was an artist escort that was assigned to Carrie Underwood when she won her first award for Jesus Take the Wheel and everything. And she came off stage, and she was like hugging everybody, and she hugged me, and I was like, "You're Carrie Underwood and you're hugging me. This is crazy." So it was great. It was a lot of really good experience where, the school just provided us the ability to just be thrown in there with a lot of high up professionals that knew what they were doing, that had been doing this for years. And we learned everything from, like I was saying, talent escorts and such, but, rigging and what it takes to actually load in and load out a show, and how much goes into it through, the touring process and everything. A lot of it focused in music again, but yeah, so got to do that. I think we did that 2 or 3 years. I can't remember which one, but it was really exciting. It was awesome.
And then talk about you worked for MTV for a little bit also while you were in school, correct?
Yeah. So what was that? I don't remember exactly what that was. Can you remind me where you're getting that from? I can talk about it. Sorry.
The Follies.
Oh, okay. So Fall Follies, that was a different thing. Sorry. So
That's
MTV actually, I think, may have been the CMT thing. But Follies was a school sponsored event that we did. That was the variety show stuff that I was talking about, where we went out and we put together, it was very much like kind of a mini SNL, but it was all staged. And it was a variety show, music, dances, and acting, and We brought in different bands, musical acts from around the area. It wasn't just people at the school, but that was cool. I'm trying to think of what the CMT thing was. I should have looked at my resume before I went on there. Yeah, I feel awkward about that. Sorry.
No, that's okay. It's all right. So you kind of had a lot of experience throughout college, but after school,
Yeah.
or I believe it was during school, you went and worked for Z Gallery. You were the assistant manager for Z Gallery.
I was working my way through school. It was funny. I came from a family that didn't have much money, but Belmont was kind of expensive.
Okay.
So my mom was like, I'll help you pay for part of it, but you're going to have to work your way through college. And so I did. I worked a full schedule, did a full class schedule. Plus I ended up working, I was basically 30 to 40 hours working retail at the time, and also doing all of these events and everything that I was telling you about. So it was, man, I don't know how I did it. I couldn't do it now, I don't think, but I basically didn't sleep. It was like, you're a college kid, so you're used to that. And I found time to have a social life in there as well. Yeah. So that was, yeah. I was under 21. I probably shouldn't talk about that.
So after Z Gallery, you went and worked for the Red Dress fashion show. Would you consider that to be your kind of like your big break after college?
Actually, no. It took a little bit to actually get me to that point. When my big break really was, Belmont actually ended up hosting the presidential debate in 2008.
Okay. It
was between Obama and McCain. And it was right when the stock market was crashing and all kinds of stuff was happening. And anyway, so Belmont was hosting this debate, and CBS News came to cover the debate. And because I had done so much with the school, I had actually already graduated by this point. And the school called me and said, hey, we need somebody that really knows the school and the grounds and the area and the event center that we were working in. It was the same event center that we had done the CMT Awards and that I had produced all of my shows in. They said, so we really need somebody who knows the area to just come be kind of a runner for CBS. And I was like, well, this is a great opportunity. Sure, let me see if I can even do it. I can't believe I considered not doing it because I was afraid that I wasn't going to be able to get off of work. But so that was my big break. I ended up taking the job and ended up working for CBS, and I was working for them for, I don't know, about 8 days while they were there, and amazing experience. Got immersed right into television. I had told you that all of my event experience up to that point had been live events. I had never thought about television, but I got to watch, this nationally televised debate that was being directed from a truck right outside the event center, right in front of me. So just got kind of thrown in. And I did something that I used to roll my eyes at, when we were in college, and they say, be smart, network, take copies of your resume or whatever. I took copies of my resume, which pretty much had nothing on it, except for working retail and a few events that we mentioned in the CMT stuff. And I handed out my resume, and about 2 weeks later, I got a call from the director who I had really gotten in with. I was just so into it while we were there, and he called and he said, you were good. Would this be something that you were interested in pursuing? And I was like, well, this sounds kind of great. Yeah. Nobody's getting jobs right now. So I ended up going to New York for a week and kind of shadowing everybody. It was right before the 2008 election. So the studios at CBS were all, just buzzing with excitement. And I fell in love with it. So I ended up moving to New York and started working very limited on the weekends as a little production assistant for the CBS Evening News on the weekends. And that's what got me into, you were talking about Red Dress. So I ended up working Red Dress because I got into, I met a friend who was a producer who, actually, the original friend that I met was the set designer for it. And they introduced me to a few other people, and I ended up just working, kind of as a artist escort. I don't remember who I was with that first week, but I had already, done a lot of that with CMT. And so it was just kind of a natural transfer. I already had the skills. And, I ended up working for Red Dress for, I think, 3 or 4 seasons. And then at the end there was right up with, the major, I didn't know anything about fashion at the time, but the guy that I was assigned that was producing these shows basically created what we know of as being fashion shows now. I mean, he was around for a very long time. His name was Kevin Cryer. And so on that last one, after working a number of events with him, I was finally, I was right there by his side for the majority of the rest of it, just learning everything that he was doing.
Wow.
Yeah, it was great, on we're talking New York Fashion Week, a major benefit concert or a benefit show that had, probably 20 A-list celebrities. I mean, it was really amazing just to be in on that kind of a caliber of a production. Again, I just kind of kept stumbling into it, but I was actually just writing about this, which is why it's on my mind. But I was thinking, a friend of mine that I actually went to college with, she was talking about, she's always told me, she was a little bit older than me, but she's always told me that luck is preparation and opportunity. And I just kept preparing, and I just kept seeing opportunities, and I would go out there, and because I had prepared, I was ready to do the job. And it just kept happening that way over and over and over again. Is there a certain amount of third part of that that's absolutely, divine or the universe working or whatever? Yes, but absolutely, you got to prepare. So that's how that came about. Fashion Week. Gosh, you're taking me down a long road. This is great.
And then after the fashion show, you went to Base Entertainment, and you were the operations manager.
Yeah, I didn't start out as the operations manager. That actually was something that came up, and I started out, like I was saying, when I moved to New York, I was only working for CBS part-time. And the Red Dress stuff was off and on. It was event-based, so it didn't happen, but twice a year. It was once in the fall and once in the spring. And so there was a lot of other time to kill there in the meantime. And I had to pay bills. So I ended up actually getting an executive assistant job working for Base Entertainment. It was the theatrical assets of what used to be Clear Channel.
Okay.
And then when Live Nation bought out Clear Channel, the CEO that was running Clear Channel at the time put together a proposal and bought out all of the theatrical assets from the merger and started their own company. So they already had things shows that were going. A lot of them were in Vegas. They had Phantom and Jersey Boys.
Okay.
Wayne Brady. I think they were doing a Wayne Brady show at the time. Yeah. So I just ended up working as an executive assistant I was working for 2 people. One was the CFO and one was the COO. You can never serve 2 masters. That did not work out very well. But I ended up being there for long enough and doing a good enough job and with enough changeover. Honestly, there were a lot of factors to this, but ended up working in operations and business development, and really, that was great. That was one of the fun parts about being able to take the business degree that I had from college and being able to implement a lot of those skills and strategies. And I learned stuff there that I still use today in terms of contracting and being able to model and forecast, projects that I'm working on and such. It was just a wealth of knowledge. So I was working there 5 days a week. I was working at CBS on the weekends. So it was really almost about 3 or 4 years there where I was working 7 days a week. It was crazy, but you got to hustle.
Yeah.
You don't make it in New York if you don't.
And then you went to Live Nation, and you were the VIP event coordinator.
Yeah. So that was really exciting too. So these were more events that were kind of like the Red Dress stuff. So it was one-off events, but I had another friend from college who actually had gone into touring like I had originally wanted to before the TV bug got me. And TV, not TV. I did not get TV. Um, but so she called me. She was in town. She had actually gone to work for, originally, she had gone to work for Sting's management company.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so she was my first roommate when I moved to New York. I ended up living in her closet. It was a walk-in closet I rented from her for $800 a month in the middle of Brooklyn. I slept on an air mattress. I had nothing with me. It was crazy. But that was when she was working for Sting. And then she left that job and she went and got a job with Live Nation. And she was in charge of all of their VIP events. And they have well, for specific tours, they have a lot of these people, and each of them travels with a different artist doing a different tour.
Okay.
And so the first one that she got assigned to was U2. It was on their, I don't remember. It was the arena show, and I probably couldn't. No, it wasn't arena. It was stadium, because we ended up being at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey. And so she needed help. So she called me and she was like, "Hey, I need somebody to come help me do all this. I've got 11, I think it was 11 VIP events that she had to do in one day." Yeah, it was crazy. So the show was so big that they had 3 separate teams that were hopping. What's the word I'm looking for? They were hopping cities, because the stage was so big that it took days to disassemble and move and then reassemble. So they ended up having to have 3 separate teams that were hopping around, taking down, setting up, and as another one was taking down and setting up, they were performing at another one. And it's a fascinating process. But so they were on their US tour, and they called and she just needed help doing stuff. And I did things from setting up the rooms to bringing in the catering to managing the room as people were in there. And, it's crazy because it's just one of those things where you don't realize, how much planning goes into it. But then when it comes down just to execution, how quickly it all has to happen and how there is no room for error, especially with clients like Bono and U2. I also did the same thing for Roger Waters about a year and a half later at Yankee Stadium, which was crazy, by the way. There's a time after all the VIP events are done that everybody goes to the show. So we got to watch the show. And so for each of them, I was able to go down, and I didn't have tickets, but I had a pass, which was awesome. So I was able to go down and stand right at the stage during the U2 concert, and Bono was like spitting in my face. But then at Roger Waters, I was standing on home plate in Yankee Stadium watching this tour, and it was the coolest thing. Nobody gets to stand on home plate in Yankee Stadium, but I was just hanging out, like drinking a beer, standing on the mat. It was awesome.
Oh, wow.
So good times, a lot of work, but there's definitely rewards that come through it, and it's a lot of fun.
So before we get to CBS News,
yeah, sure.
Talk about the experience of graduating and making that move to New York. What is it scary?
It's petrifying. I really had 3 friends in New York. One of them was the one that I just told you about that was working with Sting. Another one was actually the one that ended up quitting her job at Base Entertainment, which I ended up taking over. So I got jobs from both of those people. But that's really it. And then there were a few people that I had just met, at CBS that I had, budding friendships with, but nobody that I really knew, I guess that, when you're 22 years old and then you move to New York City, that's a big jump. That's huge, right? Yeah. So, and it was scary. It was really scary. It was a big leap of faith. But New York is actually not as scary as people think it is. It becomes very small very quickly. And once you get there and start, I was lucky in that the people that I had already started those budding relationships with were able to bring me in and introduce me to other people. And so those friendships blossomed quickly. And that gave me a lot of encouragement and strength and the ability to to kind of, I mean, the ability to keep going. That sounds really dramatic, but New York, I mean, it's not, I say it's not as bad as intimidating as it was. I also hated it for the first number of years that I lived there. I absolutely hated it. It was nothing like I had grew up with. I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, in a conservative Christian family. And, you know, then you get released into, you know, Nashville and learning in Nashville, and then released into a bigger city of 14 million people. It was just nothing like I knew. You know, there weren't a lot of green spaces, there weren't parks and nature and whatever, but you just find a way to find those things. And I eventually came to actually love living in New York. So yeah, right out of college, pretty scary, but I did it. I would do it again in a heartbeat. No regrets whatsoever.
And by this time, you'd been working for CBS News on the weekends, but when did you actually go full time with CBS?
So I went full time with CBS in, I think it was September or October of 2011. I had been working on the weekends at the evening news. I had been filling in the mornings for what was then the early show that became CBS This Morning. And then I was also filling in on the weekday evening, the weekday evening news, which was difficult because I also had a full-time job. So I was, you know, I was like, oh, these are opportunities, and you have to decide and prioritize, you know, what's gonna get me where I want to go. You know, really know where you're going. So there were times when I was taking off of work from my weekday full-time job at Base Entertainment so that I could learn how to work on the weekday evening news. But eventually, you know, my work ethic and you know, my skill as it eventually progressed. By the way, in the beginning of working at CBS, I sucked. I was terrible. I had an executive producer who wanted to fire me. They gave me 6 weeks, and they were like, if you're not better in 6 weeks, you're gone. Well, it's also a weekend. So it's not like I had, you know, 5 times 6. You know, it's not like I had 30 shows to get good.
Yeah.
I had 12 shows to get good, at least to a point where they couldn't fire me. And that's a lot to bring in. So I eventually, you know, like there was a lot behind you. It was like, you just moved to New York. Your executive producer is already not happy with you and threatening to fire you. And you've got 6 weeks, you better get it together. So I did. And that showed a lot. So then it ended up that, sorry, this is a long story, but 2011, I ended up getting a call from somebody that I had worked with within CBS in the building, and they called me and they said, hey, we have a permanent position, a long-term but not guaranteed permanent position for 60 minutes.
Okay.
So, and to me, I was like, yes. I mean, come on, who calls you and says, you know, 60 minutes needs you? Like, yeah, you go. So I quit my job at Base, and I started at 60 minutes. And the reason that it wasn't full-time consistently was it was due to somebody being out because of a medical concern, and they knew that it was going to take about 6 to 9 months, I believe, for her treatment and everything that was going on. But it wasn't guaranteed. But you just know that working for 60 minutes, you're going to learn so much.
Oh, yeah.
But also, you get to put 60 minutes on your resume.
That's huge.
So I, you know, again, no regrets. I ended up doing it. And then, so that's when I went full time with them. And then it was about 3 months later, I wasn't even done with my assignment at 60 minutes, but well, I didn't think I was done with it, but CBS came to me and they said, actually, we need a full-time permanent position on the evening news. We need you. And they don't really give you the option to do it. It's more, you're going to do it. Oh. I did not want to go. I wanted to stay at 60. First off, the money was amazing. But, you know, besides that, and that's all because of unions. I don't know if you're a union person, but I'm very in favor of unions. but for many reasons. I understand why people aren't. I don't want to get into that, but the union that I was in, which was the Directors Guild, really gave me the ability to succeed in my career and opened up a lot of opportunities that I wouldn't have been afforded had I not been in that union. But yeah, so I ended up at that point, I guess it was right after Christmas, I think, that I ended up going to the Evening News. And I was there until I wasn't.
So talk about, like, you're at CBS News, you're in this big company, like conglomerate, basically.
Yeah.
And in 2020, you don't have to say, you decided to go take other adventures, maybe you could say. What made you choose that choice?
The decision was made for me. It was interesting. I had a lot of great experience when I was at the Evening News. I worked under numerous different directors, some and executive producers and anchors, and developed working relationships with each of them. It's fascinating how a place can change just based off who's there, who's in charge, who you're working with. But one of the biggest things that it taught me over the time that I was there was how to be good under circumstances that were consistently changing. You can't rely on, it's not a formulaic method. You're constantly reevaluating, constantly looking around you and seeing what's changing, who are the different personalities, what is it that they like, in television at least. But I think that this is something that probably applies everywhere. You are a good employee by learning how to anticipate what your boss needs.
Okay.
If you can get into that person's head, if you can understand, and you do that by listening, you do that by observing, you do that by hearing the conversations that they're having with other people, because then that informs the track that you're working on, and seeing the big picture and understanding how the whole puzzle all works together. So, I worked with many different people. It was awesome. It was fun. It was liberating in many ways. I learned a lot about myself. But I actually wanted to leave in 2016. My goal was to leave right after the 2016 election. And then Hillary Clinton won Donald Trump won the 2016. And it completely changed everything, and not because of a political stance, but because I had seen so much of what the media in and of itself, whether good or bad, however it's viewed, was attempting to change, how journalism was changing at that time because of that presidential election. And so I knew that I was good, honestly. I say that humbly, but I knew that I was good at what I do. And I knew that I didn't feel that I could leave at that point in time. I felt like the skills that I had grown were necessary, kind of brought up for a time such as this. And so I stayed. And I ended up, I was there for another 5 years. And I'm so glad I did, because again, I grew so much.
Yeah.
But so then 2020, the great COVID happened, and that was wonderful. That was fascinating, actually. We ended up, everybody ended up having to work from home, but CBS was actually one of the first places where there started to be big outbreaks of COVID in the city. And I'm not entirely sure why that is. I think I know, but I'm not able to talk about it. Let's say we weren't so smart about foreign travel. But it was a learning experience. So, at that point, it was crazy because everybody ended up having to start working from home. And I remember I think it was a Wednesday. And we were told everybody's going home. And we still had to produce a broadcast that night. So, how do you produce a broadcast when everything is centrally based, it's built to be in this nest in a big broadcast studio. We had to figure out ways to work, to work from home. And so we did. And the way that it was fascinating, the way that we ended up making it work was by breaking the systems. And we knew how to break the systems because they were the systems that we had set up to not break. So you have to be really smart in the way that you're managing your systems and setting up your workflows and everything. But once you understand those systems, and that's why it's so important, if you understand the systems, then you know why they work, and you know what elements that you can take out and change and put into a different spot and replace to make it work. It's like changing out codes in DNA. You want something, you end up putting it here and here. So we spent, I think that was March 11th, and we spent weeks of no sleep, breaking systems and rebuilding them. And it was the hardest and probably the most rewarding work I've ever done, because every day you got down to, we had a deadline. We knew that come rain or shine, that we were going on the air at 6:30 and 6:30 Eastern, for those who watch. And we knew we were going on, and we knew that there was a drop dead. We had to make it work. We had to fill 22 and a half minutes of news, and we had to have graphics and packages and audio and anchor intros and cameras that worked and everything. And so when you know that failure is not an option, you make it work. You figure out how to make it work. And it probably isn't the way that you would do it the first time, the second time, or even the 100th time, but you end up figuring it out. So it was a few months of that. And then at the same time, it was kind of this perfect storm, but at the same time, I don't know, 6 months before, Viacom and CBS did a massive merger. And which is, I think, like the second time they had done this, by the way. They were together, and then they broke up, and then they got back together again, and it was crazy. And everybody was like, "What are you doing? You sure?" But as part of doing that, there were a lot of redundancies throughout the company, and there were a lot of places where the company was like, "Hey, you got to cut. We know where all this is coming from." But what's crazy about it at the time was that news during the time of COVID was one of the only things that was bringing CBS money. So you would think, yes, because we were doing so many special reports, and because everybody was finally at home during the day, they weren't at work, right? And what do you have to do? Well, you were watching television. You're watching for the next, presser to tell you what's happening in the world or whatever. So advertising dollars were all being spent on commercials at the time, because retailers were also freaking out because they were losing tons of money. So they knew that they could spend to get people to drive traffic to people online. So advertisers were like, "Hey, come shop online. You don't have to go to a store." And we were like, "Hey, we need money." So at that time, news was one of the only things that was actually selling commercial time at that point. And we were bringing in tons of it. You would think that would be a place where they didn't have to cut money, but they did. So I think it was May 27th, 2020. I got a call, and it was, "Hi, sorry, but you're one of 70 people who have been luckily chosen to no longer work for us. Congratulations." And it was crazy. It was nuts. I was completely blindsided, didn't see it coming.
Wow.
And for a while there, I was freaked out. I had never lost a job before. And I knew that I had never lost a job before. I wasn't necessarily pissed that I lost the job, because it was a lot less stress off my plate. I was more mad that I wasn't the one that got to do it. It's kind of like rejection when you're in a relationship and you want to break up with somebody, but you want to be the one to do it, and then you don't want them to do it because that'll just hurt your ego. So yeah, it was nuts. And then I spent the last year really figuring out what it is that I wanted to do. I was very turned off to TV news. I didn't want to be in it anymore. I was kind of looking at it as an opportunity to do new things.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody was hiring either. I mean, I think I saw the other day, I was looking it up, I was working on something, but I think like the economy in those first few months, they shed like 30 million jobs. Nobody was hiring.
It's crazy.
So what do you do? Well, you can sit back and you can do nothing, which was really tempting. I was being paid a severance, so that was nice. Or, figure it out. And I'm not a person to sit on my butt. So, well, except when I'm in a chair. But I did, and I just started networking with people and working LinkedIn and figuring out, what it was that I wanted to do, and really found kind of an inner, I don't know, a refinding, I guess, of what it was, an analyzation of the last, I guess 15 years of what I had been doing and what all of those things had in common and what I enjoyed and what, if there was a central thread that I could pull out of it. And what that central thread actually ended up being was storytelling. I love storytelling. I know that sounds nuts, and everybody, like, that's, when you say storytelling now, that's kind of like a new buzzword for people who don't quite know how to, it's like an artistic, nobody really knows how to call it. So they're like, ooh, I'm a storyteller. But that's what I found. And so I just kind of kept going with that and really trying to gravitate towards others who seemed, in a virtual perspective, because you couldn't get together with anybody, to have that same passion and that same drive. So, and I did, and I formed so many awesome relationships that have come out of this since then. So yeah, that's.
And then quickly talk about, after CBS News, you went to StoryDog and Root and Roam. Talk about working for those two.
Yeah, so StoryDog was actually not something that I went to. It was something that I ended up creating with two friends of mine.
Okay.
That I met through this process of networking and everything. One's name is Klaus, and the other is Stacy Barton. And I think you know Stacy Barton.
I know Stacy.
And that's really where we got into some corporate storytelling and started working with some clients and helping them figure it out, what their narrative was in this time of COVID and how to help navigate that. So it was more consultant work. And as I figured out that was happening, I was also still applying for like creative director positions. I had made right before, well, actually, it wasn't right before. It was about in August of 2020. I was talking to a contact of mine who was the head of a marketing agency, and he said, "Hey, a really cool thing that you could do to help show who you are is to make a resume video." So I edited together a resume video and I put it out there, and I put it on LinkedIn, and it ended up getting seen by a woman who had actually gone to Belmont. And I guess it got liked by somebody that was at Belmont, and she ended up seeing it in algorithms. I don't know. But so I get a call from her husband. They're living in Texas, and he's like, "Hey, I want to hire you." Actually, I have to tell you, he's a cowboy. And so he was like, "Hey, I want to hire you." And I was like, "I don't know who you are. This sounds crazy." But so I ended up doing some contract with them as well. And that was Root and Roam. And they worked for, one of their big clients was called Peterson's Natural Farms, which is a company that produces meat, obviously. But everything that they produce has no sugar added. Mm-hmm. So it's all very good for diets, Whole30 and keto and paleo, and just anybody who wants to feel good about eating meat when they are dieting. So I ended up working on a new campaign with them for a while, and that was great. And then that contract ended, and so, but I did all that through, by the way, I don't know how much time we have, but I did all that through a company that I started. It was kind of a consulting company. It was a production company. It was just a way for me to be able to put everything that I do into one package for anybody to be able to kind of pick and mix from. Mm-hmm. So the contract that I had with Root and Roam was through them, and I've done some other projects. I'm actually in the middle of doing one today with my company, but it's been a fascinating experience, and that's really, it was born out of necessity.
Mm-hmm.
How do I recreate myself in this time? How do I take my future into my hands and move it forward and not have to rely on people? But it's been an incredible opportunity, and I never thought of myself as being an entrepreneur, but here I am.
Yeah.
So
And
it's been cool.
your company's Mixperience, is that correct?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
how do you know when it's the right time to go full time in your own company? Like when you cancel everything else out and you're like, this is it.
Well, I'm not sure. To be quite honest, I'm still learning that. But I'll tell you one thing that made it easier for me than I think that it makes for many other people in the time of COVID. Everything was different, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I had no choice but to go full time into my own company. And that was the only way that I was going to make money. It was the simplest way for me to deal with all the taxes and everything. And it's all about marketing your own self, marketing your brand, knowing who you are, what you bring to the table, and being able to clearly and concisely bring that to others who are looking for what you bring. I, on the other hand, I'll tell you, just at this point, I'm not sure if I still want to stay full-time in my own company. One of the things that's hardest about having your own company is that you have to wear so many different hats.
Yeah.
And I need to bring on somebody to do that. So, is that staying full-time? I don't know. Is that going part-time so that I can hire somebody part-time to bring in, somebody to help me do all of those things? And then working other jobs or other gigs in order to help finance that. I'm not sure, but I know that for me, and I know that this isn't the case for everybody, but for me, I had two goals when I went into this. One, I didn't want to take on any debt. So I didn't want to go out and get a loan. I didn't want to start out. I wanted to limit my liabilities. The second thing was I didn't want to bring in any investors that I was going to have to answer to right away, because I still wasn't quite sure what this was going to turn into. Yeah. A lot of people who start their own companies, or a lot of entrepreneurs, the intent of their company and what their company actually becomes are two very different things. There's a metamorphosis stage that it goes through. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it's still been too early to bring on an investor that I'm going to be responsible to, that's going to say, hey, where's my profit? Or, hey, I don't like this project you're working on. It's a lot easier to follow my own gut and not have to answer to somebody yet. So it's young. I'm still learning, still working those two goals right now. And, as for how that turns out to be me full-time consistently, I don't know. That's a good question.
But you're staying busy, right?
I'll let you know in like 6 months. Sorry?
You're staying busy and making money?
I'm staying busy and making money. It's a blessing. It really is, and it's funny because I never, the company's successful. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm operating in the black. No company does that. I'm able to learn and grow and do the things that I need to do and take time for myself and run errands when I need to, but still busy enough that, and it's one of those things that's just word of mouth. Yeah. And it grows, from one satisfied customer to another, which sounds like a marketing ploy, but it's true.
All right, man. I know you got a busy schedule. I just got two questions for you. Any advice for people looking to get into the industry?
Yes. Two pieces of advice. First one being shut up and listen. You're going to learn a lot more by the people that you listen to than you are if you're talking the entire time. You're there to make an introduction of yourself, tell them what it is that you're interested in, and then listen to everything that they say, and take the advice that they give you. The second piece of advice that I have is know your own worth, and not let others tell you that you're not good at something, or if they do tell you that you're not good at something, don't let that get you down, and go improve yourself. Figure out how to do that. There's tons of tools, to help you learn. So I think that that's the other thing. Know your self-worth, because there are so many people out there that either success is not celebrated by everybody. If you're having success, there are people out there who hate that you're successful. It's just the way that the world is.
Yeah.
So there are people who are going to tear you down out of jealousy, out of not liking you for some reason, out of being, and that's all about them. Just know who you are and go out there and do it every day, and be persistent.
That's awesome. And my last question for you, if you weren't doing what you're doing now, what's another career that you would be interested in doing or would be interested in trying?
I always wanted to be an airline pilot. Actually, when I was like 16, my goal, I was going into the Air Force, and I was going to be the pilot of Air Force One. That's what I wanted to do. That was like that was my thing. I don't know. Ended up not happening, but that's probably what I would be doing. The other thing that I really want to do that I haven't gotten around to yet, I have a real passion for like not climate change in terms of politics or whatever, but just climate and how we relate to the stories that are happening all around us within our shared atmosphere within all of our homes. I would love to travel and tell stories about how we interact with our climate and how we live off that, and how it's changing just based off, again, not bad things and coal and whatever, but just based off how everything's interconnected. So at some point, I'm going to end up doing that.
That sounds super interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris, for taking the time. I know you got lots to do. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I hope this was helpful to somebody.
Yeah, it will be. Absolutely. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day.
All right. You too.